close my. I won't ask questions, but. Yeah.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi.
So we're going to get started in about 3 minutes, but if someone can just get the chat going to make sure that you can hear us and see us clearly, that would be really helpful. So we'll get started in about 3 minutes. Oh, good morning, Mano.
Good morning.
We're missing you, Carrie.
You're probably thankful you're on the other side.
That's
this
right.
morning.
You're relaxed.
Morning, Julie.
Stephanie. Just a reminder, if you are online on your computer, to jump on the slide deck, because we're going to be trying a little more of a question answer with the chat this morning. So in the email that Catherine sent you, there's a slide deck. So if you could just jump on there too, that would be great.
Good morning, Rola. Good morning, staff.
No, we can't see you waving, but we believe you.
We feel it.
Yeah.
Morning, Allison.
It's a lot of smiley faces.
Yeah, somebody
She
for
is-
this morning.
Someone has her coffee, yeah. So we're going to get started in about 1 minute.
Morning, Tara. There is some feedback.
Does anyone else hear the feedback?
No.
Yeah. Maybe refresh the YouTube link, see if that helps. Maybe it's the coffee. Also true. All right. So good morning, everybody. It's 7:45 sharp. So we're going to get started because we're just aware of everybody's precious time this early in the morning. Thank you for joining us for our second Third Path Book Club sort of webinar. We're excited to be here. So we have, we're actually going live on location this time. We have a beautiful yellow wall, courtesy of St. Dominic's School. And we're very thankful for Lena and Jerry for hosting us today. Lena is in the room and she promises not to make any silly faces at us this morning. So we're going to get started really quickly. So we have our mental health lead here, Elizabeth Paquette from our board. We have Leanne Stanton, who is part of the social emotional learning team. And we have Lise behind the scenes as well, coaching us and mentoring us on our webinar this morning. And she's also one of our social emotional learning partners. So take it away, ladies.
So good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Seeing lots of people popping in. So we thought this morning we would try for a little more of a question answer format. So you'll see on the slide deck that we've put in some questions for you this morning. So we're focusing on the first two conditions, safety and regulation. And so we'll start talking about safety a little bit. And it's really great that the authors have helped us to unpack the why and how students can develop and learn. And The first little bit about attachment is really interesting. There's a great video on the slide deck too that you can watch that helps you to learn a little bit more about that. But we do have the expert here. So I'm going to let Elizabeth talk a little bit about attachment theory and how it helps us to understand students and their behavior, and then we'll take a look at some of the questions.
Okay, thank you, Leanne. So in the third path, the authors talk about, as human beings, we have two, I guess you can say somewhat competing systems that motivate us. So one is a system that he calls it the exploration system, which pushes us to learn. So that's what makes us want to learn. We see something new, we're naturally curious, we want to explore it, find out more. Then we also have our attachment system, which is kind of the opposite, which pushes us towards safety and security. So if you think of a young child at a playground, they see this big structure, they want to go explore it, yet they're a little bit afraid and they want to stay close to their caregiver for that security. So that's where the attachment can help us with actually our learning, or it can hinder us. So if you have a solid attachment with an adult caregiver, where they provided you with security, safety, you're confident, you'll be more inclined to go and explore the world, knowing that they're always going to be there if you need them to come back to. So if you do have a high level of stress or fear in your exploration, you know you can go back and there will be somebody there consistently to support you and get you on your way again. So that's that secure attachment. And that's what we're always striving for with our kids. We need really three things to get to that secure attachment. You need to have, as I was saying, that they refer to as a secure base, so that caregiver who gives you that security and safety. And then he talks about needing serve and return. Sounds like a tennis match, but and everybody, if you think about an infant and you've ever held an infant, naturally we start doing serve and return. You gaze into the eyes of the baby makes a little smile, you smile back to them, they smile a little bit more, you smile a bit more. That's that serve and return. And that's actually forming the pathways in our brain for us to make these connections and relationships. And through that attachment, we then start to develop our internal sense of who we are, that I'm a person who's worthy of love, I'm a person who deserves that safety and that attachment. So that's how attachment starts. But attachment is really a pattern. It's not fixed trait. It's not something you're born with and that stays that way forever. And when you don't have that secure base, then that's when we talk about different patterns of attachment that are not as positive. I don't know if you want to get into all that now, or if you wanted to.
Well, I was just looking, there's a statement on page 37. It is estimated that approximately 1 in 3 children grows up in circumstances in which safety and security needs are not regularly met. So I just thought that was really kind of a shocking stat. And it kind of brings us to the first question, how can we understand student behavior from an attachment perspective? So those of you maybe who have read through about attachment, maybe even watched the video, maybe just share some of your insights about attachment and how that helps you to think about some of the students in your classroom. Putting you all on the spot now.
So Allison was talking about how she found that alarming, right? And just hearing those numbers sometimes really shocks us into learning a little bit more about it and what we can do in our classrooms.
And when you don't have that secure attachments, as they're referring to the 1 in 3, what you might often have is what they call ambivalent or avoidant attachment. So you may have a parent, for whatever reason, and certainly not judging, parents may have their own mental health issues or high levels of stress in their lives and are not available. But a parent who sometimes may respond in one way, but another time will respond another way. So that inconsistent. Then what the child learns is, I don't know how I'm going to, when I have my needs that need to be met, I don't know how that adult is going to respond to those needs. So then they develop strategies to deal with that. So if it is a parent or a caregiver who is inconsistent, maybe insensitive, doesn't respond to them, in the child, that makes them very insecure, not knowing what's going to happen. They can become very fearful, whiny. They develop patterns then to get the attention. And those are, we would maybe view them as maladaptive, and certainly in a classroom, they are not behaviors that are then conducive to learning.
And I really liked your point about not judging the parent,
Yes.
right? You know, we can slide into that a little bit easily. So I think that's really important to sort of keep in the back of our minds.
And you may see, and you'll in the video that Leanne referenced, it gives it's a little bit of an extreme example, but it does give an example of within one family. Children may come in different circumstances. So you've had one child and the parent is doing very well. There's very secure attachment. Life circumstances change totally, and that parent is no longer available themselves because of circumstances to be that secure attachment. So a second child may very much have more of an avoidant or an ambivalent attachment.
And just a question from Jackie too, or more of a statement. She was just talking about how when they talked about eye contact for secure attachment, now with technology becoming a little bit more prevalent in our world, is that taking away from that interaction that is important during development?
That's a very good point, Jackie. And certainly, I think you can see that right from the beginning, right? If you go back to those infants, very much that eye contact is so foundational to development. And if it's not there, and then as kids get older, like you say, distracted, we're not making the eye contact, that is a very significant factor.
Elizabeth, can you talk a little bit about the brain development? So they talk about in those really early years of life that a child's brain is developing, and without that secure attachment, that there can be some changes in the brain.
Right. So it's back kind of to that serve and return. So that's where a lot of our pathways are formed. A lot of research coming out that's showing it's that repetitive routine back and forth that actually is foundational to developing these pathways. So if the child doesn't have that, so if an infant is, you're holding the infant, they're looking at you, you may be looking at them, they smile, and you're kind of not there, you may be looking at them but not physically present, and don't react to them, then they can become very distressed because there's not that reaction to them, and that will impact on their brain development. So really, it is foundational. It's the kind of the basics of the basics, is that interaction that we have starting from day one with infants will certainly impact the neural pathways that are formed. And certainly children who are neglected, research is quite clear showing brain development is much slower, which can actually impact then on physical development. So you'll often see children who failure to thrive, so aren't growing physically, although they may have because of the brain, the hormones being released to pursue that development.
I think it never would occur to me that a parent would not bond with their child or have that natural ability to be that secure base. But I think maybe that comes from a place of privilege where we don't understand that a lot of parents do struggle with that and they haven't had models. And so coming back to that judgment piece of really trying to understand families and where they're coming from and just trying to support them. And I know the book often mentions how, school is a secure place. We're sort of that surrogate secure base for students. And I think one of the next questions is, how can we help students to feel safe and secure? So any thoughts on that?
Lee's had a good point about teenagers and making them more persistent in trying to receive what they need. And that's exactly it. These patterns that the kids develop based on their attachment is to meet their needs. So they have emotional needs. And if the adult in their life is not consistent, they learn that either I need to be more demanding. So those are the students who can, more externalizing their behaviors, or they learn that I just can't rely on the adults in my world and I just need to take care of it myself. So they're the ones who tend to withdraw. They don't work well in groups. They've learned that I have to fend for myself, and they tend to be very more isolated. So yes, it will impact their behavior. And even in adults, these are patterns that would continue in adults. And you may think of adults that that have more of that ambivalent style themselves, don't do well in fostering relationships, right? Because they're always kind of bail before they feel that others are going to dump them. That's all related to this.
I was trying to read what Karen said in my.
She was saying, as teachers, we need to make sure so students know we are a secure base. Which very important. Yeah.
Very important. So it's not only the parents, but certainly educators can be that secure base for these kids too.
And it was just interesting when I was reading it too, when you hear those stats, as Alison was saying, it's quite shocking, but then it also sort of reinforced that we can make a difference and we can we change those attachments as an educator?
Yes.
Because we see them so often. Is that
Yes,
possible? Okay.
That's definitely possible, and you're with them for a long time. You can make those attachments. It takes a while. It's not something that happens overnight. It's certainly, the older the child, the more they're ingrained in their behaviors, but definitely teachers can make that significant difference.
Yeah. Which highlights the importance of the book, right? Really, is that we have a role to play, and how do we do that successfully?
I think one of the really interesting things in safety is looking at the cycle of student behavior. So I'm sure some of you, when you were reading through, could think of some of your students and some situations that you encounter in the classroom. And in one of the strategy guides for safety, there is a little case study talking about a grade 4 classroom and a student who's overwhelmed with math and how that student just goes through the cycle. And so sometimes I think that when we're caught up in the cycle, we don't have a chance to reflect, but looking at, all of these stages, what's the context? So what is that student coming to school with? I would call it like their little emotional backpack. What triggering events may happen? There's always the emotional response before the behavioral response, and then often our educator response. So I just think it's really interesting to sometimes step back and debrief after and look at that cycle and think about, how it's really difficult sometimes to resolve these things, and it takes a long time. But that, we are their surrogate base, and there's a lot of things that we can try. I see lots of things popping up.
Yeah, but they were just sort of reiterating what we were saying about our role in providing security and stability for students.
I think one of the things that last night when I was reviewing that often throughout the condition, it talks about how it takes a long time. So some of these things that we're trying with students, it feels like it's not working or that our efforts are kind of failing, but it says it takes a long time, that all of the things that we do with our students really matter, and that we will see change happen over a period of time. And if we're talking about attachment issues, that could be something that takes a long time to, I don't want to say fix, but to change those pathways in the brain. Mm-hmm. So maybe looking at our questions, what makes most sense to you about the cycle of behavior? Can you think about certain students? And also thinking about our own internal working model. So we have our own internal working model, our own attachment patterns that we bring to our job as educators, and just thinking about how we respond. And there's a really good chart on page 45 that talks about some of the student needs and how we can respond to them. So some of those little strategies.
So would we be coming in, with a biased lens then? So if we have an attachment style that we grew up with, are we coming at it from a different lens? And can that affect how we support other students in the classroom?
Definitely.
Okay.
Definitely. We are human as well, so we bring with us our upbringing, our experiences, our personalities, and that definitely can have an impact. So we need to be cognizant of it. So when Leanne was talking about the cycle of behavior and the context, we're part of that context as well, that we need to be cognizant of how we respond and our biases too, of how we perceive students and what we believe the reason behind their behaviors to be.
Okay. And I think as challenging as it is in those moments with students, some of the words that I wrote down that were coming up to the table is, staying calm, always offering support, help, giving students the space that they need. But I just thought it was really interesting to read through some of these emotions and what it is that students actually need in those moments. So sometimes it's just to validate where they're at and then be able to offer support.
There's a good question from Valerie. She was wondering if we may see an increase in students with ambivalent attachment patterns with distracted adults in our home. Maybe we are already seeing that. So
yeah, that's a good point. Certainly made possible. Yeah, that ambivalent, that inconsistent
I think one of the last things that's worth mentioning in safety is that idea of repairing those relationships. So sometimes when we're caught up in that cycle of student behavior, that things happen, big moments, and it's all about that repair that's really important. And I highlighted here that it's important that as educators, as role models, that we initiate the repair after some conflict has occurred. So sometimes we get in that place of anger and we don't want to come back and repair the relationship, but I just really like here that it highlights that we need to initiate that. It's really important for our students. And just to reiterate, number 10 on the big idea is that attachment patterns are deeply ingrained and change very slowly. So we have to remember that change is slow, but that all of our efforts are really important.
Just if I can just add, Leanne, that idea of repairing is really, really important because just that fact that you come back and maybe apologize or say, I should have handled this a little differently, validates so much for that student and teaches them even more lessons. So I know it's not always easy to kind of take that step back, but it can be worth even more weight by doing that. So very important.
And I think it shows that we're human and that we're going to make mistakes too, and we are going to get caught up sometimes, but being able to show them that we're human and even to rely on each other to say to other people, like, can you help me out or whatever it is.
And it shows that you care, right? If you come back and make that apology or that correction, that says that you care, that you're investing time in that, which goes a long way again to forming that attachment.
Routine and consistency. Absolutely. So I think it leads nicely into regulation because that we know that a lot of our students have stress. The numbers are there, the stats are there that students are dealing with a lot of stress and that these attachment issues, their internal working model can lead to a lot of stress, and so they bring that with them to school. And so thinking about the stressed student, so there was some really alarming statistics on the bottom of page 51, or things that we sometimes don't think about, but we know that our students are coming to us with a lot in their emotional backpack. And so I think understanding regulation and dysregulation is really important, and how we can support our students and explicitly teach them about stress and how to cope with stress. So one of the first questions that I have is, what new understandings do you have around regulation and dysregulation? So if anybody has any thoughts on that.
I liked his comment about regulation is really interpersonal in nature. So it's not necessarily something that we do alone. It really talks a lot about that co-regulation. And if you think of ourselves, that's often how we also want to regulate. So it's really those relationships again.
Yeah, it talks more about the serve and return. And I think sometimes we think when we're caught up in that cycle of student behavior and there's moments or interactions with students that we kind of want to leave them be. And I think for me, it's just made me realize the importance of co-regulation and how our students really need us. And the authors even highlight in the book how as adults, we seek out other people when we're in moments of stress, that we, want to share our feelings and talk things out. And so our students even more so need that piece where we're just there with them and helping them to regulate.
And now, coming as a teacher, if I'm feeling very overwhelmed with the fact that I would have to help co-regulate all the students that I have, like that's a big undertaking. Can peer-to-peers also co-regulate? They can. So then that would be something that, is important to build into that instructional time, because again, realistically, like it would be a challenge in our classrooms today. And thinking of the teacher stress component of it all. So I think that would be important to scaffold into the learning, is that peer-to-peer co-regulation as well. How can they help each other? Because it takes a village.
And we also need to keep in mind that when you're dysregulated, it's a continuum, right? It's not everybody is dysregulated off the chart. So sometimes we're just a little dysregulated, and that's where we have to learn to kind of do that more, that self-regulation. We may not need a whole lot to regulate that. So.
True. I like how they say that school is a critical place for students to learn how to regulate. Just thinking about school being a really challenging place, lots of moments throughout the day, lots of teachable moments where we can help students to understand stress and to understand, what's happening in their bodies, what's happening in their brains,
So I highlighted a lot of little parts during the chapter about stress and distress, and that's some of what we try to do on the CEL team, is to help educators teach students and use different tools. So if any of you have any really great ideas or strategies, feel free to add them in here. But maybe Elizabeth, you can talk a little bit about the brain and how the fight or flight stress response.
Mhm.
I think that's really interesting for people to understand.
Right. So I think pretty nowadays people have all heard about the fight or flight response. But I think what's really interesting is that's a physiological response that goes back to, I use the example of cavemen, cavewomen. So way back when, for them, stress would have been survival. So you're going out hunting and there's this big brontosaur that comes after you. You need that fight or flight response. So you're going to all your adrenaline is going to pump in, all those big muscles that you need to be strong to either fight or to have the speed to be able to run away to safety. Our bodies respond the same way today to the stressors that we experience. So that example of a math class, our body is releasing adrenaline and cortisol, this pumping us up for that fight or flight. Neither of those responses are really appropriate in a math class. Fight or flight might just be to storm out of the class, not appropriate, or to lash out and to fight, not appropriate. So we're still dealing though with those physiological reactions. So our heart rate is going up, our blood pressure is going up. Inessential things like digestion are stopping. And so kids are really feeling that tension, and again, with all those hormones and et cetera, thinking does not happen. Our brains are not into a thinking mode, we're into survival mode. So it's not into a planning or how can I handle this, how can I do this? So that's where often kids will get into trouble with those stress reactions. And it's purely from a physiological perspective.
Really good point here. The difficulty with dysregulation is that much of the emotion and related behavior tends to happen outside the student's awareness. So often we really get caught up in thinking that the students are behaving this way on purpose. And that often the stress response is that, their amygdala is taking over. So we teach the students about how that little emotional part of your brain takes over and your prefrontal cortex is not there to help you make good decisions. So we often think that they're doing it on purpose when really that emotional reaction is kind of out of their control. So helping them to understand, how am I feeling, sort of thinking about like, okay, that it's the yellow light and I have to stop before I get to that place where I lose control. So I think that's really...
Yeah, and then Stuart Shanker, there was a quote that he said, see a child differently, see a different child. So it's just kind of that reframing of, they might not know what they're doing or how they're responding. So just keeping that always in the back of your mind. Even when it's hard, we all know that, but knowing that it's coming from, like you said, all those physiological responses as well.
Yeah. And as Leanne was saying, they may not be aware because it could be very remote. So it could be something, the stressor may actually be something, it's in the home environment that they're not making that connection to why they're struggling right now in a language arts class. It could be a peer relationship issue that they're having. So for some of those kids, it's really hard to understand what it is. And if you even try to talk to them about it, you have to really do some exploring to find out what it is that's upsetting them.
Yeah. And then Jody just had a really nice reframing as well. Oh, it's gone. If you would see the hoodie over the head or someone coming in late, shuttling down, we sometimes see that as a sign of disrespect, when in fact they are in alert mode, right? Like that could be the safety blanket, that could be their comfort zone. So just again, reframing what we're seeing because it could mean something so much more.
I really love the examples that the authors use to talk about the different stages too, in alarm, what that might look like for a student, and how we can respond to alarm, resistance, that, maybe their home life is really volatile. And again, they're coming to us and maybe not making connections. Why am I feeling this way at school? And not really knowing that it's because things are happening at home and maybe not even understanding what stress actually means. So sometimes we use these, I want to say, big words with the kids and they don't even really know what it means to feel stressed.
So I'm just aware that we have 4 minutes left.
Oh, my.
I know, time
Time
flies. So I know we're nearing the end of the chapter anyways, the regulation chapter.
Yeah, that phase of resistance is really important because that's built up gradually. So that's when the stressors continue. So usually we have a stressor, it's a math exam, you do the exam, it's gone. But for some of these kids, those stressors are always there. So whether it be a bully at school, whether it be an abusive relationship at home, a poverty at home. And so they're always in that state of alarm, and their body continues to release those hormones of cortisol, etc. And that takes its toll on the body. And as teachers, we may not always even see that. So if you have the student come to you in September that way, you just make the assumption that that's just the way they are. They're that disrespectful child with the hoodie on. Whereas that could be something that started many years ago. Sometimes it's good to talk to a teacher from a few years back. Were they like that in grade 3? And they say, oh no, in grade 3, we almost happy-go-lucky child. Then what's going on that's made that change?
That's one of the things that I thought about last night, is that importance of the team approach. So sometimes, if you had the child last year, or the child has multiple teachers, that we're really working as a team to try to understand a child who has a lot of stress and thinking about how we can best reach them and best support them. And I highlighted here, academic activity should be the vehicle through which connection is sought. So sometimes we really push that academic piece if they're, being compromised by chronic stress, that might not be achievable for them in a lot of those moments. And we need to think about what's realistic for the student to be able to achieve and how we can continue to build the relationship with them.
And that's where I think chunking is a really great accommodation that can be made. So instead of, if you're noticing the stress, I think it's really important to scale back academically and build up that, the academic sort of demands, but then supplement it with a bunch of social emotional learning strategies, right? So engage in one activity, give them what they need emotionally, and then sort of see that build as you go.
And maybe thinking about how we can take more little moments to connect with students and help them to co-regulate. What can I do in this moment to be with that student? Sometimes it's just being in the room and knowing that you're there, I'm here for you, or just validating. I know you feel this way because, without trying to fix what's going on. And on my last slide, I just highlighted again that helping students to regulate can take a long time. So I think sometimes as educators, we want to put together a plan, teach them about stress, put the tools up, and then it's like, well, they know the tools, how come they're not using it? But if we think about even as adults, we have a really hard time coping with stress and regulating. So developmentally, we need to think about our students and their age and maybe other things going on, and understand that there are reasons that it could take them a really long time to successfully use those strategies, even if they can list them all out. Being able to make those connections perhaps isn't necessarily there developmentally.
Any final words, Elizabeth?
I'm good.
You're
Again,
good?
summed it up very nicely.
Any final thoughts from the
There's still comments.
There's
coming
still lots
in.
of comments. They were talking about breathing strategies, meditation, co-creating success criteria.
Modeling was a
Oh,
great
yes.
one.
Yes,
Very,
modeling.
Yeah.
very
Safe place.
Safe.
Yeah, lots of great strategies. Thank you, Jackie. So that ends our formal chat, our second webinar for our book club. We look forward to the third one happening next month, and you will receive more information about it later. And thank you, St. Dominic and Lena and Jerry, for having us. We appreciate it, and we enjoy the background. Enjoy the rest of your coffee and have a good day, everybody.
Have a good day.
Bye.